I now have the pleasure of inviting the moderator and panelists for Session 2, Edging Ahead, Vietnam's Leadership Transition and Economic Potential, on stage. Moderating this session will be Dr. Lê Hồng Hiệp, Fellow, Vietnam Studies Program with ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. Joining him on the panel are Dr. Tavipon Vasavakul and Dr. Nguyen Bingum. Dr. Hiệp, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second panel of the Regional Outlook Forum 2020. My name is Lê Hồng Hiệp. I'm a fellow at the Vietnam Studies Program of ISEAS. It's my great honor to chair this panel on Vietnam today. As one of the most vibrant economies in the region, which expanded more than 7% last year, which is a rather high rate compared to other economies in the region, Vietnam is attracting more and more attention from investors across the globe. Here in Singapore, the interest in Vietnam is also running high, and that's also the reason why we have decided to include panels on Vietnam in recent editions of the ROF. And today we are happy to feature Vietnam again, not only because of the high interest in Vietnam, but also because 2020 is an important year for the country. Politically, 2020 will witness major preparatory steps towards the 13th Congress of the Vietnamese Communist Party. The Congress will be held early next year and will set the directions for the country for the next 5 years. And issues to be watched include top personnel changes to be made, the prospect of the anti-corruption campaign, and signs of economic, political, and foreign policy changes, if any. Economically, although Vietnam has performed quite well over the past few years, but I think in 2020 there will be more and stronger headwinds for the economy due to domestic challenges as well as the adverse global economic environment in the context of the US-China trade war. How will Vietnam take on these challenges? What are the prospects of the economy, and what are the opportunities and challenges that investors should expect in the rest of the year and beyond? In order to answer these questions, we are very fortunate today to have two distinguished speakers who are recognized authorities on these topics. On my right is Dr. Thivapon Vasasakun. She is founding member and lead specialist of the Governance Support Facility Initiatives. She has extensive experience working in Vietnam, working as a governance researcher and a consultant since 2002. She focused on different areas including public administration reform, decentralization, performance management, anti-corruption, access to justice, and citizen participation in the country. She received her PhD from Cornell University and used to teach on Southeast Asia and Vietnam as a visiting professor for different universities and programs in Vietnam, Australia, and the US. Today, Dr. Tavipon will talk about the political scene in Vietnam, focusing on the anti-corruption campaign and the forthcoming leadership transition. But of course, she will be able to cover other relevant topics, especially in the Q&A session as well. On my right is Dr. Nguyen Bingum. He is former president and currently senior advisor of the Central Institute for Economic Management, CIEM. The institute is under the Ministry of Planning and Investment. He just retired from the CIEM last year in August. Throughout his 35 years at the institute, he made great contributions to the economic reform of Vietnam, acting as the key drafter of many important laws, such as the laws on enterprise, laws on investments, and laws on bankruptcy. His policy-making experience covers different areas, ranging from institutional reform, economic restructuring, state-owned enterprise reforms, to business environment reform, investment, and competition. Currently, he is also serving as a member of the Public Administration Reform Advisory Council and the Economic Advisory Group of Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc. Today, Mr. Kung will discuss recent developments and future trends of the Vietnamese economies, focusing on the China-US trade war and its impact on Vietnam. But again, he's ready to take on your questions on other issues of your interest in the Q&A session as well. As in the previous panel, each speaker will have about 20 minutes to present their topic. After that, we will have about 20 minutes or so for the Q&A. So now, without further ado, may I invite Dr. Tavipon to start her presentation, please.
I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to participate in this session on Vietnam's leadership transition and economic potential. And thank you, Dr. Hiep, for the introduction. As Vietnam gears up for the 13th Vietnamese Communist Party National Congress in early 2021, preparations and political priorities have focused on anti-corruption campaigns and leadership rejuvenation. For this presentation, I will first look briefly at the nature of corruption in post-central planning Vietnam, and then move to discuss General Secretary Nguyen Bingum's anti-corruption drive and leadership rejuvenation strategy since 2016. And I will wrap up by highlighting remaining agendas for Congress preparation in 2020. So let me begin by first reviewing corruption as the key political challenge facing Vietnam. It is the key challenge because of its forms, its systemic nature, its persistence, and its impact. In terms of forms, corruption in Vietnam has evolved into multiple forms of bribery, appropriation of state property, and privatization of state power. In the era of Đổi Mới, it is quite common for citizens and businesses to use grease or unofficial payments to speed up or obtain better administrative and social services. There have also been cases in which state officials have benefited personally when they equitize state-owned enterprise, use public funds, or manage natural resources. Increasingly, corruption has expanded to include the use of state management power for personal or group benefit. And this is seen through law enforcement, policy making, and personnel management. So basically, these three forms of corruption, grease, appropriation, and privatization, are present across sector and administrative levels. Corruption is systemic, okay? Emerging with Vietnam's transition from central planning and having become an integral part of the Đổi Mới process itself. They have resulted largely from concentration of state management power within the party state institutions, from slow development of the rule of law, from decentralization, and from weak accountability. And these factors have interacted to give rise to and sustain patronage networks based on vested economic interests within the party state apparatus. In terms of persistence, Vietnam's attempts to fight corruption is not new. In 1998, the National Assembly Standing Committee promulgated the anti-corruption ordinance following a popular uprising in Thái Bình province. In 2005, the National Assembly passed Vietnam's first and most comprehensive anti-corruption law. And in 2007, it endorsed the office of the National Steering Committee for Anti-Corruption under the Prime Minister to carry out prevention and handling. But despite these legal and institutional frameworks, progress on combating big corruption cases was limited. And this was mostly due to a lack of commitment and means to fight faults with top party state officials. At the organizational level, heads of state agencies were also not active in identifying problems, as the legal frameworks directly held them accountable for any malpractices found. In terms of impact, overall, corruption challenges one-party rule both politically and economically. Corruption networks in the party-state apparatus threatened VCP cohesion, legitimacy, and the effectiveness and the efficiency of the one-party state. So the question is, how does the VCP address political challenges? The Vietnamese Communist Party, under the leadership of General Secretary Nguyen Bingum, has adopted a party-centered approach to fight corruption. And there are 4 pillars of action: detection and prosecution, organizational restructuring, personnel rejuvenation, and prevention and sanction against position buying. So let me go through the measures one by one. The first pillar is detection and prosecution of grand corruption cases involving high-ranking party-state officials. From 2016 to 2019, the VCP disciplined over 70 retired and incumbent high-ranking party officials, including 18 Central Committee members, 17 military generals, 7 provincial-level party chiefs, 5 ministers, 1 deputy prime minister, and even 1 Politburo member. Unprecedented in scale, the drive has both targeted key senior party officials involving in corruption cases and also undercut the patronage networks that sustained it. The second pillar is organizational restructuring of both party committees and government units to streamline the governance structure. Proposal to dissolve regional party committees in the Northwest, the Central Highlands, and the Southwest followed, as did proposal to merge the Central Party Committee for Review and the Government Inspectorate, which are both anti-corruption agencies. Problematic party and government units were dissolved or merged, and one highly publicized case was the Ministry of Public Security, which in 2017 dissolved 6 central bureaus and reorganized more than 1,500 district and grassroots level units. In Vietnam, 63 provinces and municipalities, party committees have taken initiative to restructure provincial departments and district offices. The objective of this organizational restructuring is to reduce overlaps in management areas considered fertile for abuses of state power. The third pillar of action is personnel rejuvenation through the reform of Cadre work, which itself consists of 3 aspects. First, Politburo Decision 90 details the qualifications of leadership positions in major political institutions, as well as party committees and provincial chiefs. The qualification criteria include political, moral, educational, technical, and health aspects. The 13th Congress will be the first to use these criteria in the selection of the new leadership. The second aspect of Cadre work is the clarification of centralized responsibilities and the appointment and introduction of cadres as candidates to party committees at different levels. And this move is crucial in light of the opaque 1992 framework that had caused difficulties in tracing the series of decisions made about personnel. And the third aspect of Cadre work is Cadre development planning to 2030. This planning move is also critical because the last comprehensive plan was carried out some 20 years ago, back in 1998. Some key innovations in Cadre work are the promotion of non-local individuals to positions of provincial and district chiefs, and development of a balanced age ratio. All these aspects will help support the rejuvenation process. The fourth pillar of action is prevention and handling of precision buying. Regulation 205, passed last year, focuses on the strengthening of internal control mechanisms, and these include rotation of individuals responsible for personnel management every 5 years, prohibition of family members in management positions in the same organization, the required reporting of irregularities and confidentiality of personnel files. Regulation 205 also has a separate section on position buying and power trading. It rewards whistleblowers and imposes sanctions on violators and accomplices alike. So the four pillars of this party-centered approach are a comprehensive move to promote leadership, transition, and rejuvenation. But as path-breaking as this party-centered strategy is, every new path has its challenges, and let me go through some of the key challenges. The first is whether decentralized party committee will carry out consistent implementation and what will actually be done in practice. A second challenge is the technical requirement involved in some of the government reorganizational work. Leadership transition and rejuvenation will need to go hand in hand with the reform of the public management system. Yet, there has not been a comprehensive and standardized approach for the reorganization of the government system, especially at subnational levels. At one point, the Ministry of Home Affairs had to intervene to ask provinces to temporarily stop restructuring provincial departments and district offices and wait for further guidelines. Finally, a third challenge is that the political economy of corruption in Vietnam varies from one sector to another, and even within the same sector. In some cases, corruption is a result of monopoly and weak accountability, while in many others, it is justified by economic growth. Corruption also evolves quite differently in rich and poor localities. So overall, General Secretary Nguyen Phu Chong's anti-corruption work is a positive start. But although it's a positive start, the new Vietnamese Communist Party leader will need a more full-fledged strategy across sector and administrative levels in order to sustain preliminary gains. So let me move on to suggest what to look at in 2020. There are at least 4 main issues to follow in the year 2020. The first is to assess the implementation of personnel and organizational frameworks outlined by the VCP in preparation of party congresses at the local levels, that is at the commune, district, and provincial levels, and whether leadership transition and rejuvenation actually occur. The second issue to watch is the structure of the 13th Central Committee, which will be operating from 2021 to 2026. During the Doi Moi era, Vietnam has moved incrementally toward a decentralization of the party state structure. And this can be seen politically in the composition of the Central Committee since the 6th National Party Congress in 1986. It remains to be seen whether the 13th Central Committee will reflect changes in the direction of decentralization. The third issue is about the candidates for the 4 top leadership positions, that is General Secretary, President, Prime Minister, and Chair of the National Assembly. VCP requirements set forth so far for those top leadership positions are an age limit, 1-term experience in the Politburo, and good health. On the first count alone, that is on the age limit, we can expect the current 4 incumbents to vacate their positions. Okay. And of the remaining Politburo members, only 7 are qualified. So others, if elected to the 4 top positions, would fall under the category of special cases to be approved by the Central Committee. There has also been a question on whether or not the posts of President and General Secretary will continue to be held by a single individual, or if they will be held by 2 individuals as before. Given that the qualifications of President and the General Secretary, as described in Politburo Decision 90, are somewhat different, it is unlikely that a single individual will be able to meet the criteria for both positions. The last issue to watch is the preparation of Congress document. The VCP has set up 5 subcommittees to prepare the political, socioeconomic, personnel, organizational, and implementation of party statute reports. It remains to be seen whether the preparation of these documents will provide opportunities for party members and the public to air their thoughts liberally, and how the VCP will react to public criticism, if any. So let me wrap up by saying that the 13th National Party Congress is certainly to be politically significant and also politically challenging. All eyes should be on the organizational and personal frameworks that have been set up, and if they will prove effective in the selection of new party state leadership, and if they will effectively reduce the purchasing of party state positions. In terms of policy directions, the year 2020-2021 marks the beginning of another long-term policy cycle to 2026. By extension, it also sets the cycle to 2030 and 2045, when Vietnam will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Vietnamese Communist Party and the 100th anniversary of Ho Chi Minh's Declaration of Independence. It remains to be seen how extensive anti-corruption work will be further elaborated in these Congress documents, and how specific anti-corruption measures will be institutionalized in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tavipon. Obviously, the anti-corruption campaign is a big topic in Vietnam, and it is still going strong. Just a few weeks ago, there was a trial that involved the 2 former ministers of Information and Communications. And just last night, the Inspectorate Commission of the party announced that they recommended the Politburo to issue disciplinary actions against a former party chief of Ho Chi Minh City and also the incumbent party chief of Hanoi. That means, like in Vietnam, they say the furnace of Mr. Trump is still burning, and it's burning hot. So I think there will be more developments for us to see, to watch in the coming months, in the run-up to the party congress. But before we go back to that in the Q&A session, I think we can listen to the perspective of Mr. Kung first on the economic status of Vietnam. Mr. Kung, please.
Thank you, Dr. Hiep, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to be here and to share with you my personal perspective on the issue we are very interested in Vietnam. That is China and US trade war and its impact on Vietnam economy. The first good news is that so far no evidence of the negative impact on the Vietnam economy. Vietnam GDP growth still quite high and recover to the more higher growth rate as we have seen in previous period. At the same time, We strengthened macroeconomic stability and the resilience of economy have been also significantly improved. But in terms of export, we have seen export growth decline since 2007, and here a significant the evidence show that the export of the FDI sector declined. But export of domestic sector increased significantly. And I think that 4 times higher than the export of the foreign direct sector. That is the first time in Vietnam economy, the export of the domestic sector growth higher than the export from FDI sectors. It means that the export growth maintained so far mostly because of the export growth from the domestic sector. So far, US is the largest export market of Vietnam, account for 20% of the total export. Export to China, I think that China is third largest export market of Vietnam, account for 16% of total export. But China is the largest import market of Vietnam, account for 20%, 28% of total import of Vietnam. Whereas US import account for only 5%. There is huge differences between the import from China and from US. Therefore, we have quite increasing trade surplus with US, but trade deficit with China. And last year, we have seen quite significant impact on the import from Vietnam, export from Vietnam. Export last year increased only 8%, but mostly depend on the export to the US, increased 28%. Export to EU increased only 2.3%. Export to China increased almost not increased. Export to ASEAN increased 2.4%. Export to Japan increased to 7.6%, and finally, export to South Korea increased about 10%. It means that most increase of the export depend on the US market. In terms of export structure, ICT still account for 33% of total export of Vietnam. and South Korea and Japan investors still play dominant role in these sectors. In terms of investment, there is also no evidence that Vietnam has been winner of trade, US and China trade. We have seen no reallocation of investment from China to Vietnam. As we have seen here, the growth of the foreign direct investment, implemented foreign direct investments last year at the same as previous years and lower than previous periods. Also, last year, total for new registered investment not increase, but we have seen that decreased trend. For example, new registered FDI decreased 7.7%, and I think that is the first time new registered FDI decrease. But foreign direct investment so far mostly is concentrated in the manufacturing, especially ICT sectors. And as I say before, Korean and Japan investors still dominate in production and export in these sectors. But one new phenomenon in the FDI flow in Vietnam, that is China emerged as more important players in investment in Vietnam. So far, in terms of stocks, main China is fifth largest investors in Vietnam. But last year, in terms of flow, China is second largest investors. Compare mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, I think that they account for about half of investment flow to Vietnam last year. One more thing is that more China investors by share of the domestic companies. And we have seen, I think that we have seen a lot of more Chinese investment flow to Vietnam in last year, and I think that we expect more from next year, coming years. In summary, firstly, everyone say that Vietnam would be winners from the US and China trade war. But in my opinion, the impact so far very mixed. Firstly, there is no evidence, clear evidence of the impact to the Vietnam economic growth. Vietnam economic growth so far, or this year, or next year, last year, I think it depends mostly on the robust domestic reforms, and especially promotion of the private sector development, not because of the FDI, not because of the increase of the export, but I think mostly because of the promotion of the private sector development. Export so far, I think that still of FDI decrease. And I think that it will decrease because of the reallocation of their supply chain. No clear evidence of Vietnam is the winner of the investment. But as you have seen that general FDI in general declined. Only investment from China increased significantly. I think that the ICT industries, some say that Vietnam maybe become in half because of somehow reallocation production from China. But I think that so far is no evidence, and they're quite challenged or difficult for investors to allocate more production to Vietnam because of the shortage of labor, not only that is low skill, but not only high skill, but also low skill labor. Therefore, wage will be increased. Secondly, I don't think that the government will provide robust, very strong tax and other incentive package to coming investors. Like we have seen the package investment incentive package to Samsung and some few others. But I have seen for Vietnam government very challenging to balance a relationship between US and China, because two very big players for the Vietnam economy. We depend largely on the two that market. For China, we depend on the import market, but for US, we again depend on export market. Therefore, we get increasingly surplus, trade surplus with the US. But I think that Vietnam government do not want to see that phenomenon, do not want to export more to US to get the surplus. To do that, we have to reduce the import from China. So we do know that it's also very challenging for Vietnam when we reduce the import from China and reduce the export to the US. And that is, I think that for me, I think that we do not as winners, but I think it's more challenging for Vietnam government to maintain a balanced relationship between the US and China. But that factors have very great impact to Vietnam, not only Vietnam economy, but also Vietnam foreign policies and many other aspects in the internal politics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kung. Now we have about 30 minutes for the Q&A session, but before I open up the floor to everyone, I would like to take advantage of my position as the chair of the panel to ask two speakers a few questions first. My first questions go to Dr. Tavipon. So far, the anti-corruption campaign is more visible at the high level. As you mentioned in your speech, there were political members, ministers, members of central committees, etc., being prosecuted. I think that's something good for the country, for the party, and the people are happy that corruption is being dealt with seriously. But I think for most people, especially businesses, they are more interested in the low-level corruptions. For example, corruption at the local government, or some agencies that they deal with on a daily basis, like the customs or the tax authorities. So, from your observation, how is the government doing in terms of dealing with low-level corruption? Do you see any progress on the ground? My second question is, given the upcoming leadership change in the next party congress, and one of the possibilities is that General Secretary Nguyen Bingum will step down, do you think the anti-corruption campaign will continue, and to what extent, and what should Vietnam do to make its fight against corruption more effective and not dependent on a single person, single politician? So that's my questions for Dr. Tavipon. In the interest of time, I think I should also ask Mr. Kung some questions so that he can prepare as well. You mentioned in your presentation that there's no evidence, or clear evidence, that Vietnam is a winner of the trade war. I think this is quite contrary to some observations from many people, including some experts here in Singapore. So in your opinion, in order for Vietnam to become a winner in this trade war, I think it's going on for some time more, what should Vietnam do? What reforms should Vietnam implement to benefit from the trade war? My second question is that recently the Vietnamese government revised GDP upwards by 25.4%. I personally feel happy about that because suddenly I become 25% richer overnight. But I'm not sure about other people, especially the businesses. My question is, talking about the reason, the government, especially Prime Minister Phuc, has recently mentioned that this is not to improve the track record of the government, to paint a rosy picture of the economy, because they are doing quite well already. They want to get the right picture of the economy so that they can make better policies. But can you please share with us, because you are an advisor to the Prime Minister, can you share with us some insight about this decision to revise the GDP statistics, and especially the implications for the policy making of the government and the business communities at large? So before we go to the questions of Mr. Kung, we can listen to the response from Dr. Tavipon first.
Okay, thank you for the question. On the first question, related to concerns of domestic and foreign investors in corruption at the lower levels and what the government has been doing in this area, maybe I should just start answering this question by clarifying that the way I look at corruption when I look at corruption in Vietnam, I classified it into three types. The first type is just grease or speed money, where businesses and citizens have to pay extra or pay informal fees for administrative or service delivery. And then we have grand corruptions in the form of appropriation of state property by civil servants, officials, and then we also have like the abuse of state power for private or group gain. So we are talking about the first type of the first form of corruption, that is when businesses and citizens come into contact with government officials, and what happened during the transaction. good news is that the government actually has been paying a lot of attention to this type of corruption. There is a phrase in Vietnamese, they call it petty corruption, or like grease, kind of the process of greasing or whatever, boi trơn in Vietnamese. And as early as, good news is that as early as 1994, I remember Prime Minister Vo Van Kiet actually launched a big campaign to simplify and reform administrative procedures, okay, when coming into contact with citizens and businesses. So this is really kind of an ancient thing, some 20, 30 years ago. But as Vietnam has progressed, okay, we see the development of a two-pronged strategy. The first strategy to get rid of or to reduce corruption when it comes to administrative and social service delivery is to set up what we all know, the so-called one-stop shop. That is, it's kind of a center or a mechanism where people can go, submit application, get an appointment letter on when they will come back, and then get the results. And then there will be like a list of like fees they have to pay and so on and so forth. The Vietnamese started piloting this in the late 1990s and then universalized it in 2003, 2004. So the mechanism is there. If you go to Vietnam, you see one-stop shops. And a lot of people believe that increasingly it probably will help promote transparency and reduce the so-called petty corruption. So that's one way, okay, to address the problem. Another way to address the problem is to promote the so-called simplification of procedures. And this started in earnest in 2008, I think, with support from the USAID, when all government agencies were compelled to slash administrative procedures by like 30%, something like that. He is laughing. Okay. And anyway, that has become a practice too, because after this project ended, the Ministry of Justice took the initiative to set up a bureau called Bureau for the Control of Procedures. Okay. And then this bureau would go out and then try to make sure that there were not too many procedures coming up. How well is Vietnam doing? I have to rely on information from Ease of Doing Business from the World Bank to let you know about the progress. So basically, there was some progress from 2010 to about 2016. Okay, Vietnam did much better. The ranking moved from like something like 98, 99 to 68, which was quite good. Okay, but during the past 2 years, I think the performance was not very good, so like the rank dropped a little bit. So that's how Vietnam has approached this. But I can't answer specifically on the custom thing because I don't know. But I know that there is a law in 2014 trying to fix the problem. Okay, but I don't know the details on how this is done in the custom section. So that's the first question. The second question on like how to make anti-corruption more effective and not dependent on one particular person, like General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong. I think it's a very good question. And the way to look at it is that we have to give some credit to the General Secretary. He is an experienced person in the area of personnel. And if you look at Vietnam, it's the way in which all the elements are put together is very interesting. I can't think of anything in Southeast Asia, when you start from the leadership. And then you have like bits and pieces being put together in order to make sure that there is leadership rejuvenation process. So I think the credit should go to whoever involving in this process because it looks pretty good, okay, on paper. So, but the next step would be what I have mentioned briefly in the presentation, that is leadership change has to go together with the reform of the public management system, because having good leadership doesn't automatically guaranteeing that the machine will work effectively. And in the case of Vietnam, there are a lot of governance problems when it comes to the structure of the government at the central and local level, problems related to accountability and so on and so forth. So the new leadership really has to push the process forward by thinking technocratically a little bit on how to further reform either the public administration reform, however you want to call it, to build capacity and so on and so forth, to have better governance, to support preliminary gains. Yeah, so that would be the next step.
Thank you. On the issue of corruption related to tax or customs procedures, I think some of you here are doing business in Vietnam and you may know better whether things are moving or not. So if you have any things to share, please come forward after this. But now we can listen to a response from Dr. Kung. Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. The first one is how Vietnam can be winners from the trade war between US and China. And I think that Vietnam should be not only winners from the trade war, but that also winners from the more free trade agreements we have been signed. And what I mean winners is that reality, opportunities from that movement should be realized by the domestic investors, private domestic investors, and for benefit of the Vietnamese people. So far, what I have seen, that foreign investors have taken more opportunities from the free trade agreement than domestic ones. And therefore, I think that we, government and party, should focus more and give priorities for the domestic reforms, more market reforms of the economy, to make the domestic businesses are willing to grow up, and also they are able, who are willing, they are able to grow up. Nowadays, what I have seen, they are afraid of growing up, and they are unable to grow up. Therefore, I think that more reform should be liberalized, market liberalized of the economy, relate to the anti-corruption also, that we should reduce the power of the ministries to issue regulations, make regulation more, not only transparent, but more predictable. This is more important. That consistent application and predictable. At the same time, I think that we should reform also Russian sector. Court should be more independent and more confident for the people and for the businesses to bring their dispute to the court to resolve efficiently and effectively, so that creates more confidence for the domestic investors, for the people to make more investment long-term and in the larger extent, so that they can compete and get benefits, real take opportunities and get benefit from the free trade agreements and some maybe opportunities from the trade war between China and US, and more benefit for the Vietnamese people. In terms for second question, I think that firstly, before revision of the GP, we in the internal conversation, and some say that we still have some segments still not calculated in the GP. And I think that our government officials and the leaders visit different countries, and they observe that our people spend, they think that our people spend much more than as we have observed that their income. Therefore, they think that our GP may be more than what we calculate. And suddenly, GSO found 76,000 companies still not included in their survey. And they say that that number of the companies, the revenue of that number of companies should be included in the GP, and they count, and 76,000 the new find the companies account for about 15% of GDP. But this is quite a long story. But impact, I think that impact may be that every almost macro analysis of the Vietnam economy become wrong because of the revise of the GP, especially for the indicators such as budget deficit, public debt ratio, foreign debt ratio. It means that the government will have the rooms for more borrowings. And I think that one significant impact is that government feel that they have still significant rooms for more borrowings, and I hope that they will borrow for more infrastructure developments and more efficient use what they borrow. I don't think that we can increase the revenue of the budget. I don't think that we can increase revenue by increasing tax from the businesses and from the people. And I think that that is mostly maybe the implication. Second, maybe implication is that the pressure for the increase the salary and wage. Because every say that we nowadays average is 4,000 US dollar per year, not 2,800. And they fear that, okay, that therefore that many groups of the people, they found that, that their salary and income is much, much lower than average. And therefore maybe there is pressure for the increased salary and the wage, that is impact, maybe certain impact to the businesses and investors.
That's bad news for investors. So anyway, we are running out of time, so I would like to open up the floors to questions. Please identify yourself and keep your questions as short and sharp as possible. May we have the one round question? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nguyen from Control Risk. We are a global risk advisory company. Thank you very much for very informative presentations. My first question to Dr. Taviporn. Talking about anti-corruption in Vietnam, yes, I agree, it's a very important topic. But anti-corruption also have been a main reason why the privatization process in Vietnam been delayed. As you might know, like lots of real estate projects in Ho Chi Minh has been freezing because no one dare to make any decisions. I'm sure many investors here have had the same sentiment in Vietnam that like lots of license been delayed, no one want to sign in any approval at all. So do you think that Vietnam Communist Party is playing with fire, whereas like anti-corruption will soon have very damage the economic growth? On the other hand, like they still have to chase after the anti-corruption to boost their legitimacy. And my second question to Dr. Kum, I agree with you that Vietnam is very challenging for Vietnam to stay balanced between the US and China powers. And the impact from the trade war is still quite unclear. But during the past, like in the 90s, Vietnam relied heavily on the anti-US nationalism to boost the Communist Party legitimacy. But recently, especially since the China become openly aggressive in South China Sea, the anti-China nationalisms become very strong in Vietnam. And by resisting that nationalism, the Communist Party will cost a lot more legitimacy. So do you think that Vietnam soon might have to move closer towards US than China? Thank you very much.
I think that it's a good point, especially in the case of Ho Chi Minh City. And we know that Ho Chi Minh City is one of the donor provinces, one of the 13 provinces that delivered about 80% or over 80% of its revenue back to the central government. So it's probably very frustrated with whatever has been going on. In the short run, yes, I would say that the anti-corruption drive that has been going on has slowed down a lot of economic decision-making and economic activities, especially in major cities, wealth-generating cities. And this is not just because decision makers and government officials are afraid to make decisions, but it's also has a lot to do with the fact that there are a large number of inspection teams going in. And normally inspection takes a lot of time. It's either from the party side or the government side. You kind of spend like months, in order to provide information and to verify information. So of course, it's a waste of time. It has a major impact on the economy. So it depends on how you want to look at it. I think Ho Chi Minh City was frustrated at one point, but again, you can also make an argument that this is a period of adjustment because in reality, government officials can only make effective decisions when the existing legal frameworks are clear. Okay, so if there are cases in which existing legal frameworks are not clear, the priority should go to how to make them clear before further decisions are made. And the case of the Thu Thiem development area, that implicated the standing member of the party committee and later also with the party chief, the former party chief, indicates that back in the 1990s, actually it was not very clear who had the power to make changes of the development plan and so on and so forth. But now everybody was criticizing the city of changing what Prime Minister Vo Van Kiet had signed and stuff like that, But back then it was not very clear. So that's something that has to be taken into consideration, and the time has to be spent
to sort out some of the legal frameworks too.
Thank you.
The reality is that it's more public sentiment against China that is growing in Vietnam. That is reality. That because of two reasons. The first one is China most assertive in the South China Sea, and we see that our national interest is violated by China. And second reason, I think that this reason is not because of mostly China. That is, the reason is that most China-supported project is not efficient in Vietnam. And my personal view is that not because of the China side, but maybe also because of the poor management of our side. But I don't think that we will choose the side, and we try to make more balance. And if we choose a side, I think that is not good for Vietnam. And I think that for Vietnam, it is not choose a side. At the same time, more reforms, domestic reforms, to make the society more democratic, more open, and the regulation is more transparent, more predictable, so that creates the more opportunities for the Vietnamese people. For the question relating to whether we can continue anti-corruption without the President Nguyen Phu-trong, I think that so far, and relating to the privatization, I think that because of the unclear regulations, and regulation maybe also the overlaps, contradict. Maybe we applied one regulations and that some assessment that is appropriate, that is the right thing to do. And if we applied other regulations, other assessment is that is the wrong thing. You compete that wrongdoings and violate regulations. And therefore, in these circumstances, I found some, I call that point of the decision-making process. If you face that situation, at this point, nobody make decision. And therefore, no approval for certain projects, slowdown of the partial privatization, that equitization of state enterprises, and also certain decision related to the development project. So that is, I think, that related to that question.
So it's a quite big challenge for the party to maintain the balance between fighting corruption and maintaining the initiative of officials to promote economic development. I think there may be more questions from the floor, but because we started late this morning, although we haven't used up the time for this panel yet, but I have been reminded to wrap up this session. So you may agree with me that this has been a very interesting and informative session. So please join me in thanking our speakers for the excellent presentation. Thank you.